everyone, and today I have a really special guest. Mike Culbert's with us today, and it's a Saturday morning, and he's made the time to get up and come and tell us all about his backstory and his self-care. So, Mike, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Kath. Great to be here.
Yeah, lovely. To start, I understand you had a pretty rough childhood. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I did. I'm the eldest of 10 children. Dad was pretty violent. I got a lot of beatings, but that wasn't the worst of it. It was mainly the psychological beatings that I got every day, not every day, but often, just being told that I'd never amount to anything. I was no good. Just putting me down constantly. Of course, later on in life, I realised why that was. I found out my father was a pedophile. I found out he was sexually abusing. Well, firstly, it was my brother that called me. I was up in Alice Springs at the time, and I was with the airport fireys up there. He was a teenager at the time, and got on the phone and started crying and told me that our father had been sexually abusing him for years, and it really blew me away because nothing ever happened to me. I never saw any sign of it with any of the other brothers and sisters. And then he indicated that my sister knew the eldest sister. When I got in touch with her, I actually had a go at her and about not actually telling me or not actually bringing this forward. And she burst into tears and told me I'd been happening to her for as long as she can remember. And then I flew home, kicked him out. Long story short, he was charged, convicted, and he did 7 years. So, when I spoke to psychologists, I worked out that, his insecurities, of course, most insecure people want to put other people down to make themselves, or attempt to make themselves feel better. So it was just constant when I was younger, and it really had an impact on me.
How old were you when you found out?
I was 27 years old.
My goodness. And were you married at the time, or?
No, I wasn't. I was with a partner, but not married at the time.
So did that make you reflect upon your own upbringing? I mean, it would have to, given that you said your dad was psychologically abusing you. Did you suddenly start to examine your own life of who you were and how you'd taken this all on board?
It was interesting, Kath. At that stage, I think I was just in. I've always been about helping people, even as a kid at school, whether it was because of what was happening with my father, or not, I'm not sure, but I'd always protect the kids who were getting bullied. Even years later, I had a guy from school contacted me out of the blue back in the days when there was phone books and they could actually find a phone number. And he came around my house. I invited him around, hadn't seen him since school. And I asked him, after a couple of drinks, he bought a bottle of scotch with him. And I said, Nick, after all these years, I have to ask, why did you look me up? And he said he was having some trouble in his life. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he'd split up with his wife, and she'd taken the 2 kids, and life was a bit tough. And he said, I always remember you looked after me. You looked after all the kids that got bullied at school. I was a wog boy, of course, as he put it. And back in the 70s, he said, we copped a hard time, and he said, you always looked after us. So I think at that time when my brother let me know that, and I found out about my sisters, I just went into protective mode. So I wasn't really focused on me, just looking after them and making sure that Dad got out and he was charged and convicted. And it wasn't until a few years later where that partner I was with, I ended up getting married, but it was a miserable relationship. And I thought to myself, I've got to get out of this, and it's not just a relationship. And I asked myself the question, what's the common denominator in all my problems? And I thought, well, that would be me. So I got my hands on as many books as I could on psychology, on personal development. I went and studied neuro-linguistic programming, and it was then that things turned around. I really started to have some introspection and some reflection, and my life changed completely, just gaining that knowledge.
So let's just stop there. I mean, for a bloke to suddenly say, what's going on here? What's the common denominator? It's me. What was that profound? I mean, you've just said, you know, you went and look, I mean, it's a big deal to suddenly say, I'm the problem.
I got goosebumps now, Kath, because I really have it. It was when you even asked that question, it was the changing point. Oh my God, changing point. It was the absolute most pivotal point in my life, and just having that realization. And most of these personal development books and self-help books and books on psychology, there seems to be a common grain throughout, or certainly what I took, and that's about taking responsibility. And when I say, you know, I'm the common denominator in all my problems, to take responsibility for the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And not so much, you don't have to take responsibility for what somebody else did to you, but you certainly have to take responsibility for how you respond to those things. That's our choice.
And that's one of the things we talk about is emotional self-care. It's actually the hardest thing in the world to do, because taking responsibility is not always instinctive. Like, you'll push it away and you'll go away and think, hang on, this is really me that's doing all of this stuff, or I'm responding to my emotions in that way. And thankfully, a lot of the self-help books are now backed up by neuroscience. So we're actually learning about how our brains are rewiring. So did NLP really help you? Because it's a wonderful skill.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I like Tony Robbins' quote, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. You know, it's what we associate to our, all the events in our life. You know, I mean, you put two people in exactly the same situation, one will perceive it as the greatest gift of their life, and another person will perceive it as an absolute disaster and spiral downwards. It's what we want to do with those circumstances, those events, the challenges. It's really what we want to do with them up here.
Absolutely. So I understand you lost your first wife. Was that after you'd started to look at your own life, or was that in the process of this pretty profound journey?
I would never have had such a beautiful woman by my side had I not done that introspection, reflection. It changed my life. And one of the things I learned was I mean, most people never get what they want in life because they never really clearly identify what they want. I ended up writing Gail down to the finest points, her character, her values, her looks, everything. So I had my perfect partner written down, clearly identified. So of course, then your reticular activating system locks onto those things. So I ended up in an absolutely beautiful marriage. And, you know, even having Ellie by my side today, my fiance, another beautiful woman. I would never have been able to attract those sort of women into my life, those sort of people in my life, without that introspection, without that reflection. I know when I met Gail, because I really felt alone most of my life, because my father because I was so strong-willed, in hindsight, of course, speaking to psychologists, he distanced me from the rest of the family, drove a wedge between myself and my brothers and sisters to keep me away from them so they wouldn't report back to me, I suppose. So I really felt alone most of my life. Life taught me, certainly at first, if you want something done, you got to do it yourself, and nobody's going to help you. You just got to stand on your own 2 feet and battle on. So when I met Gail, it was the first time in my life I actually didn't feel lonely. So it was a great time.
So you had a partner. You knew what
I had a partner.
You knew what it was.
And
yeah.
we were like this, you know, and so that loss, it was huge. And our boys were only 7 and 4.
So how did you, I mean, grief and loss is very difficult. And, you know, a lot of us don't realize that it's not just the loss of a loved one, but grief and loss affects people in all sorts of ways, you know, loss of a career, loss of finances. It's common to the human spirit, and it's very difficult to navigate because life doesn't, you don't get over it. Life grows around it, and often we issue platitudes to people, you'll get over it. Well, you don't. How did you navigate your way through that terrible experience? Because it is terrible. It's a really difficult time.
It was tough, Kath, especially when I say especially for me. In hindsight, I look back and because I've had to develop a pretty tough and thick skin over my life, I've become very resilient. I can cite plenty of examples, especially physically. With my sport, with rugby league, I played professional rugby league, fighting, where I would make sure I was the last man standing. I'll give you an example because this is relevant to what we're talking about. I remember with my ex-partner, she had a couple of kids. So I had a couple of step-kids there. And back in '95, the kids came to me. You remember the show on TV called The Gladiators?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. They came to me and said,
you're a gladiator.
Yeah, they came and said, Mick, you should go on this show, because they saw an ad on TV asking for contestants. And at first I said, no. Anyway, they talked me into it. And I turned up down there on a Saturday morning because they arranged it all for me. And I just thought it was an interview to see if I was physically fit and had some character for TV. I get down there and I'm wearing a pair of slip-on leather shoes, pair of jeans and a T-shirt. And I get there, there's about 500 guys, all with their sports gear on. And I quickly realized that it was a physical tryout. So they would split us up into groups and they told us we'd keep going to their cadence, which would gradually be increased. As soon as we couldn't keep up with their cadence, they'd hook us, and the final 10 were on the show. So I made the decision at the beginning of the day, as it was just my nature. I said, to myself, one or two things are going to happen. And mind you, I was 130 kilos. I hadn't done any cardio since I was playing football. I was a bodybuilder at that stage, so no cardio fitness. And all these guys, the closest to me was probably 70, 80 kilos. They all look pretty fit, these guys. But I made the decision at the beginning of the day. I said, one or two things are going to happen. You're either going to take me away in an ambulance or I'm going to be in that final 10. And we had a break after they got down to the final 20, and I was in the toilets violently vomiting. I pushed myself that hard. I came back out and I thought, you know what, I've gone this hard, I'll keep going. And I got to the final 10. But I tell that story because that's my nature. So when Gail died, I actually didn't give myself a whole lot of self-care. It wasn't until a few years later that I realized I just always prided myself on being so resilient that I could bounce back from anything. And I was hurting, but I hit it, and I just soldiered on. I would read, I would expose myself, as I always do, but even more so in this case, to as much positive stuff as I could on YouTube or books or anything. But I still masked it, and it wasn't until years later, and I met Ellie a year later. Poor Ellie, she didn't put these wounds here, but I bled all over her. It was pretty tough for Ellie, and with Ellie's help too, because Ellie certainly has more awareness. We certainly did then around self-care than I did, and she helped me a lot with that. So I had some breakthroughs, but it took a few years because I got a pretty thick head and a thick skin. So sometimes it takes a little while for things to get through. But then I started to seek help through psychologists, do more self-care, and actually give the grief more credit or more due respect. And I had to realize that toughing it out, of course, that's a help and a benefit, but it's not enough. That self-care is absolutely essential.
I might just stop you there because I know in our audience there are a couple of really strong fellas that are really having a tough time. And they've got similar backgrounds to you. I'm just wondering, are you able to help them understand what are some of the behaviours you were playing out at your worst? You know, I'm fine, and what was really going on, and only what's appropriate that you'll feel comfortable in sharing.
Yeah, I'll share anything. I'm pretty transparent there. I'm not afraid to speak my mind and say what I feel. Because I met Ellie 12 months later, I think the most prevalent thing was the self-destructive nature. I actually I didn't care whether the relationship lasted or not. I didn't care if it all blew up. I put on an even harder front and made out like I was stronger than ever. And if I can get through this, I can get through anything. But deep down, the day I want to hide at home. Of course I go to the gym, but I really didn't want to. If even good friends to bring me on the phone, I'd want to cut off the conversation as quickly as possible. I'd be happy to sit home watching movies all day after I trained, and just stay inside and just shut myself out from the rest of the world. I was never suicidal, but I had suicidal thoughts. Plenty of times I thought, I wished I'd just get sick and die. Or if I drove over this cliff now, how much easier it would be just to take this pain away. And I kept that hidden from most people. And my resilience kept me going, and my resilience, my mental toughness kept me going and kept me functioning well enough that most people didn't realize what was going on. But I felt like I was, for years, just keeping my head above water. Just didn't want to admit to myself that it was depression and anxiety, but it was.
And were you diagnosed with depression? Was that what the psychologist helped you through?
It's funny. It was interesting that not long after I lost go, I went and saw my GP, and I asked for a referral to a psychologist. He wrote me the referral, but at the same time, because I'd had a discussion with him, I told him, I wasn't suicidal. I was having these thoughts. He wrote me a prescription for antidepressants. When I asked him what it was, he told me. I said, "That's not going to happen, Doc." I said, "I'm not going to take antidepressants." I said, "I understand there is a need for them in some cases, but this is going to hurt, and I'm okay with that." So I didn't go down that track. The psychologists talked about depression and the different stages and the different levels of depression, and we went down that track. But I would avoid it as soon as they would say, "Oh no, I'm not depressed." Of course, I'm sure the psychologist saw right through me, but I certainly didn't want to admit that.
It's really interesting. I had a chat the other day with a lived experience expert who's on the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee for Suicide Prevention. And she was one of the first people with Beyond Blue 20 odd years ago. And we were talking about how important it is to go to your GP, but it's also important not to over pathologize people, because we are really quite resilient in our own right. Yes, we must reach out to mental health professionals and get that support, and it can be a wonderful experience for people. But knowing that individual, because it is a relationship that you build with a psychologist, and them knowing you is really important. Did you find the right fit for you? Do you felt it worked, or did you have to go through a few?
It took a few. I remember one guy, I'd just gone back to work after I'd lost go. I mean, work was fantastic, but in the fire service, what an organisation. They gave me as much time off as I needed, full pay, no questions. I think I went back a little bit too early, and there was one guy there in particular who just got on my nerves a little bit, and I threatened violence with this guy. My exact words, cut it out or I'll take your head off. So I still, and that's not my nature, certainly not work colleagues or people in general. I'm not a bully. And the boss called me in the office and said, Mike, I think you need some more time off. So I went and saw the psychologist and I spoke to the psychologist. It was a free psychology through work. And he was a gentleman in his 60s, I think, early 60s. I told him I was having suicidal thoughts. I told him I got sent home from work for being violent. After one session, he told me that, oh, look, Michael, I don't think there's anything much more I can do for you. So I walked out there, thank you very much. I thought, wow. It actually wasn't until probably 12 months ago that I actually found somebody who was really, really good. Because I was still having problems with anger. And I mean, I had anger issues as a kid because my dad was so violent. And because I was so insecure, and most people find it very hard to believe, especially my friends and people who know me for a while. When I say I was painfully shy as a kid, they'd laugh and go, yeah, right. But I still have those feelings. It's still under there. But when I was younger, especially my 20s, it didn't take much to set me off. And with Gail, because everything was so perfect, I think that was subdued. I was still working as a bouncer and a bodyguard through those years. So that was required every now and then. It was a protection mechanism. But when I lost Gail, it really all came to the surface again. And Ellie copped the that. Never any physical violence or anything like that, but I'd certainly fly off the handle sometimes emotionally. But I found this psychologist, local guy, fantastic. So, and that's when I really, with Ellie's help, as I said, really started focusing on self-care, looking at what I can do to care for myself, what I can do to perhaps get some help on those things that were really eating me up and really causing some, destructive behaviour in my life and not giving me the results I wanted, that's for sure.
Well, okay, so I just want to say to anyone watching this at home that it is really important, if you don't feel that you connect with a psychologist, it's a relationship. So move along, go back to your GP and say, I don't think this is working, I'd like to be referred to somebody else, or ask around and try and find somebody. And thank you for sharing that, Mike. So tell me, how is this all impacting your boys? Because if you, pushing all this emotion down and I'm fine, it must have been, playing a little bit of havoc with them. Did you notice it, or was that behind you suddenly saying, I've really got to get my act together?
My mental toughness came in there, Kath, because my old man was such an arsehole.
That's saying it lightly, go on.
Yeah, I always swore that I would make sure that I was a great dad, and I have been. I pat myself on the back for that, and my boys are proof of that. So with them, I absolutely pushed it down and hit it. Did they feel it? The eldest boy, he's very, very emotionally mature. He's one of the most loving human beings I've ever come across. He's just like his mother. And when I'd be really down, it was like he knew. Even when he was little, he'd just come and give me a hug. And he knew I think he just inherently knew something was wrong. But generally speaking, no, I hid it from him. As I said, Ellie probably copped the brunt of my emotional issues, especially with the anger.
So I just want to talk a bit about exercise and sport for you, because obviously that's a really big part of who you are, but it can also be the worst thing for somebody getting to know that underneath, if you're not doing okay or haven't been. Did you think about that? Because I can remember years ago, many years ago, I was dating somebody, and he was a 6'6" guy, really big guy. And I dropped him at the station one particular time, and it was pouring down rain. And I said, I can't leave you here. And he said to me, you're the only person that's ever said that to me, meaning because I'm so big, everyone thinks I'm fine in any circumstance. which is often what happens. We take somebody in terms of their physicality, not necessarily what's really going on inside of them.
Yes, I know what you mean. It's certainly, I've always been aware of that. And because I've been the eldest boy in the family, I'm the eldest sibling in the family, and I've always protected people. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence I ended up as a bodyguard and a bouncer and a firefighter. That's just where I've been drawn to help people. So I've always put on this, false bravado, even when I was younger, insecure. And I built this body, and I learned how to fight, and I learned how to stand up for myself because my father had continually beat me both emotionally and physically. I just, even at an unconscious level, I always made sure that no one was ever going to do that again. Which, yes, it does make it very hard when you've built this invincible outer shell, and you put on this front that you're unstoppable and invincible. It's a very hard thing to actually be vulnerable enough to let people know that, you know what, I'm actually not okay. It was a really difficult thing to do, and it really took Ellie by my side to bring that out. Mental toughness. I'm the king. You can't stop me. I learned all those things, and it was valuable. It wasn't until Ellie came along and really made me aware of being vulnerable, and she got me to read Brené Brown, which I found very valuable, and that's what changed things. And it really, to mental toughness, resilience, such a valuable trait. Everybody needs it, but without the vulnerability, it can actually make things even harder, especially when things go south.
So, and I'm going to go back to talking about your regime around exercise in a minute, but I want to pick up on that comment. Do big boys cry?
Well, this big boy, I grew up in Balmain, and Neville Wren coined the phrase, Balmain boys don't cry. So for a long time, I consider that weak, and I didn't have much empathy for men who showed any weakness, and I certainly didn't want to show any weakness. So that was well and truly ingrained in me, and it took a while to break that down. But yes, big boys can cry. That's okay.
So tell me about I mean, I had to go there because you were talking about such vulnerability. And when you mentioned Brené Brown, I mean, you can't get courage, as she says, without being vulnerable. It's not possible. And that's a wonderful gift. So tell me about your exercise and diet routine, because it's got to be pretty amazing, is it?
I've trained since I was a kid, and as I said, because it was such a drive for me to get physically strong, it's just always been with me, and I use it as and I talk about this all the time. I use it as a metaphor for life. You know, if Elliot Hulse, the guy I follow on YouTube, he's an ex-strongman. He talks about the transcendent rep, that last rep that most people can't get to. They think it's over. I mean, this gives way well before these do. And I think that's such a powerful thing to know. And so going into the gym and pushing myself beyond what most people would even imagine possible, or, where most people stop well short, I consider that such a great metaphor for life. If you can build that resilience there, if you can push that extra rep, if you can go the extra mile every time. And I mean, as cliche as it may sound, Rocky Balboa his character was one of my mentors in life. A beautiful family man who would do anything for his friends and family, who would never take a backward step. And if you knocked him down, he just kept coming. And that's what I've built in my character. So training's a really, really important thing for me. And
Are there rituals that, you know, like are you up at 5:30 and in the gym by 6, or how does that play out for you? Because people will be interested.
Early mornings are devoted to my boys. So I said to Ellie a few years ago, I said, and I'll get on the rituals here, but I said to Ellie a few years ago that I want my boys to have mental toughness. I certainly don't want them to have the childhood I had. And the only way I can see how to build that is through physical endeavors. So not long after that, I read a book by Jonko Willink, who's ex-Navy SEAL, and it was called The Way of the Warrior Kid. Anyone with kids, it's recommended reading. So we call it warrior training. So 5:30 in the morning, we're up and I take the boys down the track or down the stairs or down the sand hills, and they understand what that's about. It's about mental toughness. It's not about actually a time on the stopwatch, even though we do time them just to see that improvement. But that's for them in the mornings. I'll come home, have breakfast, and an hour after that, I'm down in the gym. And then I'll do some cardio later on in the day. But I push myself hard every time. I always say that if I'm going to give up that few hours that I could be spending with the people I love or down the beach or doing something fun, I'm going to make it worth it. So when I do train, I go hard, and it's religious for me. It's a daily ritual. I like what Tony Robbins says, you know, at a seminar where, you know, he'll get people to stand up that train or don't train, people to stand up, and goes on through 6 days a week and talks about how, you know, just our physical appearance will really show what our rituals are. There's no easy way. You get nothing for nothing. So, and I've been pretty blessed too, being in the fire service. We've got a gym at work. So I feel for people who work a full-time job Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday, have a family. I mean, something's got to give. It's a really tough thing to do. But it just comes down to how bad you want it.
It does indeed. So what made you choose the fire service? Was that sort of just, you know, a random thing, or was there a backstory?
Oh, no, certainly not. I really wanted to help people. My first choice was the police force. But then the fire service came up, and I actually was more attracted to that. So I just wanted to help people. That's what I wanted to do. I find it so rewarding.
Yeah. So are you a spiritual person? Do you believe in, I mean, we're all spiritual. I mean, I talk about meaning and purpose of life. Some people it's religion, other people it's a higher presence, other people it's nature. What is the essence of spirituality for you?
I was raised a Catholic schools, but I'm not religious, not at all. I think that's all about power and control, personally. But for me, I believe we're all connected. There's times with my wife, Gail and Ellie, and they're the people I've been most connected to. There's some freaky things that have happened where I'll go to pick up the phone and get a line at work, and on the other end there's no dial tone, and it's, you know, it was my wife or it was Ellie who rang me at exactly the same time. And I can give plenty of other stories like that. I believe what goes on is so far beyond our comprehension that there's certainly forces at play here that we just absolutely don't realize. But at the heart of it for me, spirituality is, yes, we're all connected. We're all energy. We're all one.
It's really interesting. I spoke to a spiritual psychiatrist out of New York at the very beginning of COVID, when they were, you know, having a terrible time, and she was talking about how she was supporting first responders, you know, which is your profession, and she couldn't make things better. It was so awful, but she had to help them understand meaning and purpose, and it was basically that we're all connected. Like to go back out again, we're all part of this big wave of humanity. For some people, it is on another dimension, but for other people, it's, you know, it's many different things. But it's very important for people to think about that, because a life without meaning and purpose is a pretty vacuous life. Like you know, you've got to have an existence for being. There's got to be more to life.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're saying connection there. I think that's the key for me. You talk about spirituality, connection. That's it. That's everything. I mean, the connection I feel with my boys, the connection I feel with Ellie, the connection I felt with Gail, even connection here with you. You know, when Ellie told me about what you do, and then I looked it up, and I just think that's amazing. And to be able to connect with people, to help each other like that, that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Well, it is, and I'm in a really privileged position because I get to sit with people when they're really vulnerable, and you know, it's a privilege. But I also get to have these sorts of really personal conversations that a lot of people don't take the time to talk to somebody about that. And it's amazing. There's a connection you and I have built in this conversation that we could walk into, you know, a coffee shop and say g'day, and we'd probably start talking, you know, where we left off. Now, I've got to go back to Ellie because you've spoken about her so much throughout this conversation. So you're lucky enough to meet somebody else after Gail passed away. And you've navigated, you know, the grief and the loss and coming out the other side. How have you got to that place together? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that, you know, have gone through similar things, whether it's divorce or grief. You know, how did you suddenly get to a place where it was comfortable and it was, you could let the past be? You don't let it go, but you let it be where it is.
Obviously, a deep love, and at first, I actually didn't feel that for Ellie. There was just a connection. At that stage, I really, I believe I was incapable of really letting myself feel that deep love for anyone else. But there was certainly a connection there right from the start. And there were times early on where I said to Ellie, "This is all I got. I can only promise you today. I've got nothing else." But even with Ellie, you know, what I put her through, obviously there was some connection there and some love there from her. And again, I think it was just that deep connection, and it just felt like it was the right direction. It felt like it was the right way to go. And we just kept working through things. Neither of us are the sort of people who are going to settle for second best in life. And we believed in each other, and we believed in our relationship, and we believed in our connection. And we totally believed that we could get through anything. And that the fact that we both really wanted to do that, and were really drawn to each other, and were connected so much, that we live in a really great age, Kath. There's so much information available to us. You want to solve any problems? there's so much information out there. We're able to get through anything, and it was just that determination and connection. It was so for us. It was always going to be. I read a quote years ago that said, "In life, we rarely get everything we want, but most always get everything we expect." And when you have that absolute expectation that this is going to happen or that's going to happen, generally it does.
It's true. It's true. But it's a mindset. You know, I deserve good things to happen to me. You know, the notion of affirmation can sometimes be dismissed, but if your mindset's really positive, like, it does come true. It's quite incredible.
Absolutely.
So I just want to end on, because my speakers are playing havoc on me, which is charming. I just want to end on, what do you do for your own self-care? So I know you look after your diet, and I know exercise is almost second nature. What other things do you have? Dinner days? Do you ever just say, "I just want to retreat from the world"?
Oh, absolutely. I love the water. The water is where I feel most at peace. If there's ever a time where I need a break, I'll head for the beach. But I believe in, you know, prevention rather than cure too. So I'll spend as much time as I can relaxing, spending time with the people I love, and getting a massage. Even go and speak to my psychologist, who I've developed a great connection with, just to stay on top of things, have a chat, and somebody I can really bounce some things off, who's going to be completely non-judgmental. Spend time with my boys and Ellie. I mean, that's my self-care, and as I said, you know, training, taking care of myself physically and nutritionally.
Well, I think I just wrap it there, and I just wanted to say, because we ended up going full circle and speaking about a psychologist again. So for anyone watching this, and this is not a go and see your GP, but if you happen to feel vulnerable, go and have a chat to your GP, and if they don't know a good psychologist, ask around your friends, ring the Australian Psychological Society. Don't take it as that's the person. But having said that, listening to what Mike shared with us, there are lots of other things you can do to take care of yourself and to build your resilience. And you've only got one life, so you've got to make it the best you can. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kath.